In this video, we'll be looking at football mysteries that are still unsolved. How does a team go from relegation candidates to Premier League champions in one season without anyone asking the real questions? Leicester City's 2015-16 title win gets sold as football's greatest fairy tale. The plucky underdogs, with their grandfatherly Italian manager, assembled from rejects and bargain buys, somehow conquering the Premier League's financial giants. Everyone loves this story because it makes us feel good about football again. But when you dig deeper, things don't add up quite so neatly. Leicester weren't some amateur side playing on a muddy pitch. They're owned by Thai billionaire Vichai Srivadhanaprabha, who controls a massive duty-free empire worth billions. Their training ground and stadium were top class, yet somehow they maintained this little Leicester narrative throughout their title run. The timing was suspiciously perfect. All the traditional big clubs had nightmare seasons simultaneously. Chelsea imploded with Jose Mourinho, Arsenal bottled it as usual, Manchester City were inconsistent, Manchester United were rebuilding, Liverpool were struggling. When has that ever happened before in Premier League history? But here's what really bothers people who look closely at Leicester's miracle season. The fitness levels were otherworldly. While other teams' players were getting tired and injured, Leicester's squad ran further, pressed harder, and recovered faster than anyone else. N'Golo Kanté was covering impossible amounts of ground. Jamie Vardy was outrunning defenders who were 10 years younger, and somehow their key players avoided serious injuries all season. Their tactical setup under Claudio Ranieri was brilliant, no question, counter-attacking football that maximized their pace and minimized their weaknesses. But the physical execution of those tactics required superhuman endurance levels that raised eyebrows among people who understand sports science. Leicester's medical and fitness staff were relatively unknown compared to the high-profile departments at bigger clubs. Yet somehow they kept a squad of aging journeymen and lower league graduates performing at peak physical condition for an entire 38-game season, while their rivals struggled with fatigue and injuries. The club has always been secretive about their training methods and sports science approaches. When asked about their remarkable fitness levels, they'd give vague answers about hard work and team spirit. But professional football doesn't work that way. You don't suddenly develop elite-level stamina through motivation alone. Sports scientists who analyzed Leicester's data from that season found some puzzling patterns. Their distance covered per game increased as the season progressed, which is the opposite of what normally happens. Most teams show declining physical output as fixtures pile up and fatigue accumulates. Leicester seemed to get fitter while everyone else got tired. Their recovery rates between matches were exceptional too. While other squads were rotating players to manage workload, Leicester consistently fielded their strongest XI without any apparent drop in performance levels. That's not how human physiology typically works over a grueling Premier League campaign. Independent analysts noticed Leicester players were reaching higher peak speeds in the final months of the season compared to the opening games. That pattern suggests either revolutionary training methods or something else entirely. Elite athletes don't usually get faster as seasons progress, they maintain speed at best. The timing of Leicester's physical peak coincided perfectly with the title run-in. Just when other teams were struggling with accumulated fatigue, Leicester hit their stride. Vardy's goal-scoring streak came during the period when strikers typically hit the wall, physically. Ranieri's transformation from tinkerman to tactical genius happened overnight. This was the same manager who'd been sacked by Greece after a disastrous campaign, suddenly implementing a perfect system with players who'd never shown this level of consistency before. Then there's the psychological aspect. Leicester players seemed completely immune to pressure as the season progressed. Teams that had never experienced a title race before usually crack under the weight of expectation. Instead, Leicester got better as the stakes got higher. That's not normal human behavior in high-pressure situations. The mental strength displayed was almost robotic in its consistency. Players who'd previously been inconsistent performers suddenly showed ice-cold composure in crucial moments. Vardy, who'd been playing non-league football just years earlier, handled the pressure like a seasoned champion. The Premier League's testing protocols and anti-doping measures in 2015-16 were less sophisticated than they are today. Leicester's remarkable physical performances came during a period when monitoring was relatively relaxed compared to current standards. When Leicester won the title, there was minimal investigation into how they'd achieved such a dramatic transformation. The romantic narrative was too perfect to question. Media outlets and football authorities seemed content to accept the fairy tale without digging into the specifics of their methods. The lack of curiosity from sports journalists was particularly striking. These are people whose job it is to find stories and ask difficult questions. Yet, the biggest sporting upset in history was accepted at face value without serious investigative work. Other clubs quietly started asking questions behind closed doors. How does a team avoid injuries for an entire season? How do players in their 30s suddenly develop the stamina of 20-year-olds? How does tactical discipline emerge overnight in players who'd shown little of it before? Rival managers made subtle comments during interviews about Leicester's unique methods and special preparation. These weren't direct accusations, but there were enough coded references to suggest people in the game were puzzled by what they were witnessing. The answers Leicester provided were always unsatisfying. Generic talk about team unity, hard work, and believing in themselves. But professional sports don't work that way. Elite performance requires more than positive thinking. Some rival managers made subtle comments during that season about Leicester's special methods and unique approach, but nothing was ever said directly. The feel-good story was too powerful to challenge openly. Leicester's decline after their title-winning season was almost as dramatic as their rise. Many of the same players who'd performed miracles in 2015-16 returned to their previous levels the following year. The magic disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. The drop-off was particularly noticeable in their physical metrics. The superhuman running stats from the title season became ordinary the following year. Players who'd been covering impossible distances suddenly looked like normal athletes again. Ranieri was sacked less than a year after winning the title, which seems harsh for a manager who'd just pulled off the greatest upset in sports history. But perhaps the club knew something about the sustainability of their methods that the public didn't. The players who'd been superhuman during the title run suddenly looked ordinary again. Vardy's pace seemed diminished. Conte moved to Chelsea and never quite replicated his Leicester form. Mahrez's consistency dropped significantly. The transformation in individual performances was stark. These weren't gradual declines due to aging or complacency, they were dramatic reversions to previous career norms. Players who'd looked like world beaters suddenly struggled to maintain Premier League standards. Modern Leicester have remained a decent Premier League side, but nothing close to the level they reached during that magical season. If their methods were so revolutionary, why didn't they maintain them? Why did their fitness advantage disappear so completely? The lack of serious investigation into Leicester's 2015-16 season remains puzzling. In an era of increased scrutiny around performance enhancement in sports, how did such a dramatic and unprecedented transformation avoid detailed analysis? Football authorities seemed happy to embrace the romantic narrative without asking uncomfortable questions. The story was too perfect, too inspiring, too good for the sport's image to examine too closely. The Premier League and FA had every opportunity to study Leicester's methods and share them with other clubs if they were legitimate breakthrough techniques. Instead, the knowledge seemed to disappear along with Leicester's performance levels. But mysteries remain. How does a team go from relegation candidates to champions without anyone asking how they achieved such impossible fitness levels? How does every player suddenly perform above their career best level simultaneously? How does a squad avoid injuries while running further than anyone else? Maybe Leicester's title win really was just a perfect storm of circumstances, brilliant management, and exceptional team spirit. Maybe sometimes miracles do happen in football through nothing more than hard work and belief. Or maybe there are questions about that season that nobody wanted to ask because the story was too beautiful to spoil. Leicester's miracle season showed how football's biggest stories go unquestioned, while Neymar's record-breaking move to PSG revealed how money and power can bend the rules in plain sight. Did Qatar really circumvent financial fair play rules by essentially paying for Neymar through backdoor deals? When PSG triggered Neymar's €222 million buyout clause in August 2017, they shattered the transfer record in pieces. The previous record was €105 million for Paul Pogba. Suddenly, PSG more than doubled that amount for a single player. The football world lost its mind, and rightfully so. But here's where things get murky. PSG is owned by Qatar Sports Investments, which is controlled by the Qatari state. Nasser Al-Khelaifi runs both PSG and Qatar Sports Investments. Convenient, right? The same guy making decisions about Qatar's World Cup 2022 preparations also happens to control PSG's transfer budget. Almost immediately after the transfer, rumors started flying that Neymar had signed a separate €270 million contract to become Qatar's global ambassador for the 2022 World Cup. Think about that timing. PSG pays €222 million for the player, then Qatar allegedly pays him €270 million for ambassador duties. That's not a coincidence, that's creative accounting. The financial fair play rules are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of state-sponsored spending. Clubs can only spend what they earn through legitimate football-related revenue. They can't just have their sugar daddy owners pump unlimited money into the club. But what if the money doesn't technically come from the club owner? UEFA's FFP regulations have a massive loophole when it comes to buyout clauses, because technically, the player is buying out his own contract and then joining a new club as a free agent. PSG didn't negotiate with Barcelona, BSGG, they just gave Neymar the money to activate his release clause. Legally speaking, PSG wasn't even the buyer in this transaction. But everybody knows that's complete nonsense. PSG provided the €222 million. Neymar was just the middleman. The Spanish tax authorities even confirmed this by making such transactions tax-free in 2016, essentially encouraging more buyout clause activations. The really suspicious part is how quickly UEFA cleared PSG of any wrongdoing. Within a year, they announced that PSG's transfers were in line with FFP regulations. Really? A club that spent over €400 million on 2 players in one summer was somehow financially responsible? UEFA's investigation was a joke. They looked at PSG's books for 2015, 2016, and 2017, but the Neymar and Mbappe transfers happened in 2017. How can you properly assess the financial impact of deals that occurred at the very end of your review period? The math simply doesn't work without external funding. PSG's annual revenue in 2017 was around €520 million. Even accounting for player sales and sponsorship deals, there's no way they generated enough legitimate football revenue to afford Neymar's transfer fee and astronomical wages. PSG claimed Neymar would pay for himself through shirt sales and commercial opportunities. But even the most optimistic projections put his commercial value at maybe €50 million per year. At that rate, it would take over a decade just to recoup the transfer fee, never mind his wages. The Qatar Connection becomes even more obvious when you look at PSG's sponsorship deals. Qatar Airways, Qatar National Bank, Qatar Tourism Authority, NET, their commercial partners read like a directory of Qatari state enterprises. These aren't arm's-length commercial deals based on market rates. They're inflated contracts designed to pump money into PSG while staying technically within FFP rules. Barcelona was so furious about the circumstances of Neymar's departure that they forwarded all the financial details to UEFA, essentially begging them to investigate PSG for FFP violations. Even Neymar's former club was convinced something shady had happened. The timing of Qatar's alleged ambassador deal with Neymar is the smoking gun. Why would Qatar need a global ambassador for their World Cup immediately after he joined PSG? Why not sign him to that deal while he was still at Barcelona? The only logical explanation is that it was payment for the transfer disguised as a separate commercial arrangement. Other clubs were paying attention too. Real Madrid, Manchester City, and Chelsea all started exploring similar structures for their own transfers. If PSG could get away with state-funded deals disguised as buyout clauses, why couldn't everyone else? The lack of transparency around PSG's finances makes proper scrutiny impossible. Unlike publicly traded clubs that publish detailed accounts, PSG's books are essentially private. UEFA had to take their word for it when assessing their compliance with FFP rules. French football authorities were suspiciously quiet about the whole affair. You'd expect some pushback from other League One clubs about PSG's spending power, but everyone stayed silent, almost like they were afraid to challenge Qatar's influence in French football. The ripple effects were immediate and obvious. Transfer fees exploded across Europe as clubs realized the FFP rules were basically meaningless if you structured deals cleverly enough. The Neymar transfer revealed that financial fair play was a paper tiger. UEFA's settlement with PSG included vague promises about close scrutiny of future transfers, but no actual penalties. They essentially gave PSG a slap on the wrist and permission to continue their spending spree. Mbappe's €180 million move from Monaco followed immediately after. The investigation's conclusion felt predetermined. UEFA couldn't afford to ban PSG from European competition because it would have been admission that their FFP system was fundamentally broken. Better to clear them quietly and pretend the system works. But the questions remain unanswered. How did PSG generate enough legitimate revenue to afford Neymar? Why did Qatar suddenly need a global ambassador right after the transfer? Why did UEFA's investigation take less than a year when similar cases drag on for multiple seasons? Maybe Neymar's transfer really was funded through legitimate football revenue and commercial partnerships. Maybe the Qatar ambassador deal was completely separate from his PSG move. Maybe UEFA's investigation was thorough and impartial. Or maybe we witnessed the most blatant circumvention of financial fair play rules in football history, disguised as a buyout clause activation and endorsed by European football's governing body. Neymar's transfer exposed how money can twist the rules at the highest level of the game, and transitioning from financial power to sporting collapse,